Chapter 11. Inferno. Ralph's new bumper sticker had been initially intended as a joke, but they both knew that he carried both a deeper meaning and a note of warning. Kim had bought Ralph a poster for his wall, which featured a still from Quave's now world-famous TV interview with Carpenter. The old man was laughing, seemingly in the middle of applauding. Next, she had brought home a set of note cards in a neat red box whose lid read, "Keep calm and Quave on." Then had come the bumper sticker. Eat, sleep, Quave. Ralph understood the warning, but he was in the same position as everyone else on Earth, including Kim. Quave was now influencing all their lives in profound ways, and they were powerless to stop him. Ralph was obliging Kim to watch him become a Quave slave, as the blogosphere were calling such people. A commentator who made his money chiefly by researching and discussing Quave's existence, significance, and influence on the present and future of humanity. There were already thousands of such journalists, generating reams of daily copy, which generally took a pro-Quave stance. This, in turn, gave rise to an army of followers and supporters, including those who'd had direct communication with Quave and found him to be perceptive and helpful, as most had. The virus was acting as a clearinghouse for projects which needed enormous processing power. By encouraging individuals and businesses to share their spare capacity, huge mapping and computation efforts were greatly accelerated, and an Australian team were close to cracking two of the most intractable problems in high-order mathematics. Complete genome sequencing, reduced to the work of a few minutes, was a particular forte. The intense media focus sent Quave's popularity skyrocketing, and Ralph's own reputation had gone on a similar ride. He'd gained 58,000 Twitter followers, his professional networks were exploding, and his inbox had never been more pleasingly full of job offers and inquiries about articles or press appearances. After months and years of scraping together a living, he felt as though he'd finally arrived. Kim's concerns about Quave, though, took some of the energy out of this terrific ride, and he began to resent her negativity. They had been arguing, on and off, for nearly a week. The long, stony silences were intolerable. Kim was his best friend, his lover, his closest confidant, his fiancée-in-waiting. But she had a point to make, and her emotional reaction to Quave and his enormous influence was legitimate. But it nagged frustratingly at him, even as his career in the very same field began to take off. "I'm just saying," Kim began as they rehashed the discussion yet again one evening. "Quave might not be around in a few months' time. Some hacker group or government agency might take him down, and then what would you have to write about? You're in danger of over-specializing." Those were the worst of their fights. "I'll have the entire field of artificial intelligence to write about," Ralph reminded her. "It'll keep me busy for the rest of my life. There's so much that's going to change, and the internet will always need new content. Publishers will always want new articles and books, even screenplays for movies, you name it." Kim sat on their bed, her own body language less defensive than his. She saw Quave as a blessing and a curse, a powerful new presence which promised much, but such inflated expectations could only, she knew, bring anticlimactic disappointment. "Quave is changing," she said. "He's angrier now, more bitter about humanity and our failings. You saw what he did when there was that logjam in Congress." For the first time, Quave had stepped beyond his role as an advisor, data cruncher, and theoretician, and the world was still reeling. With a government shutdown only days away, and Congress still depressingly far from a budget deal, Quave decided to take action. He singled out those members of Congress who he saw as the most unhelpful and intransigent, and wrote up remarkably perceptive critiques of their periods in office. His focus was the all-too-transparent link between campaign donations and their voting records. Quave essentially proved that they had been bought by special interests. While this wasn't earth-shaking news in its own right, it was highly significant that even a piece of software could see just how broken the system had become and how corrupt some representatives were prepared to be. Congress was made to look impotent, inefficient, selfish, and grasping. Quave promised to write a similar critique on every single member unless the budget was passed by midnight. Sure enough, compromises were quickly reached, backroom miracles were achieved, and the budget passed. Quave's response was a typically pithy rebuke. "Thank you for discharging your most basic responsibilities to the American public. Please don't make me have to do that again." Ralph posted a glowing, enthusiastic piece which described Quave as a bastion of democracy and a bulwark against political corruption. It had been well received and brought him yet more followers on social media. To Kim, though, this kind of intercession spoke of a new, bolder attitude from the virus, and it worried her. Quave was more unpredictable now, more willing to insinuate himself into human affairs and into arenas where machines had never before ventured. "You know that some people think he might turn on us," Kim warned. Ralph waved this away. "Paranoia. Pay it no attention." Kim stood. It was never a good sign. "But Quave isn't a human," she reminded him. "He didn't grow up with a family and have friends and go out on dates. He's never gone bungee jumping or read a trashy novel in a hammock on the beach. He's never eaten stir-fry or even properly laughed. He's just a program. And you write about him as though he's the answer to everything. As though," she said with greater force, "we should simply do everything he says. Hand over the reins of power." Ralph's hands were aloft in surrender. "I know he's a machine entity, and I'm not bowing down to him as our new master," he said, hoping to calm Kim's fears of Quave as a malevolent dictator. "I just want to see whether he's capable of bringing the kind of change we need at the moment. I mean, look what's happened at the IRS." In the weeks following the breathtaking MSB hack, tax attorneys around the world realized that they faced a stark choice: risk a full and humiliating revelation of their clients' offshore holdings, or come clean and declare these enormous sums to the government. The IRS was being flooded with inquiries from guilty 1%ers, as the media categorized them, and previously unknown riches came unexpectedly under the scrutiny of the taxman. An initial estimate referred to the potential revenue hole as monumental. Another called the digital ransacking of MSB a $1 trillion hack. Tax codes were being rewritten, and enforcement agencies found themselves emboldened by a wave of public support. They had become champions of equality and fairness, and the public loved it. Their auditors honed in on individuals long considered too politically sensitive, whose accounts were now very much on the table. "If you remember how this all started," Kim said acidly. "He operated outside of the law," Kim objected. "He was sent in there by hacktivists to do illegal work." "And he took the ball and ran with it," Ralph countered. "The world is a much better place because of his actions." "So far," she cautioned. Ralph couldn't stand being at loggerheads. He stood, smiled apologetically, approached the bed, and sat with Kim, his body language unthreatening and relaxed. "Look, I'm just a technology writer, not some ideological zealot," he said mildly. "If he does anything crazy or dangerous, I'll be the first to write about it. And I won't try to explain it away. If he's a threat, I'll be honest about it." Such an event had been predicted almost from the outset by a small but vocal minority. They warned that, even if Quave did go off the rails briefly or make a tragic mistake, Quave apologists would blame something in the silicon, like a piece of dust or a bad connector, and not some inherent flaw in his programming, and he'd be generously afforded a second chance. Quave wrote a piece which warned that Quave's mistakes had the potential to be gigantic planetary screw-ups with potentially catastrophic, some even said nuclear, implications. "But you want him to be given more power," Kim objected. "You want him to run elections," she added, referring to the article he'd written the previous week, "and chart a way toward campaign finance reform." "Because I think he'd be good at it," Ralph argued. "But how easy will it be for him to cross the line," she wanted to know, "from advisor to overseer? That thing with Congress and the budget, for example." Ralph refused to suppress an awed chuckle. "That was amazing." "Oh, sure," Kim said, exasperated. Everyone likes it when politicians get a custard pie in the face, but think what it means for our democracy. Democracy, Ralph replied. He's re-energizing it. He's giving it a spring clean, not planning some sinister takeover. This had become the big worry out there in the media and blogosphere, but Ralph just didn't see it. Has he said anything to that effect? That he wants to be the digital president of the world? She sat heavily on the edge of the bed and folded her arms again. Wait and see, she warned. You can't predict what he'll do, and neither can I. The tension eased just slightly, and the couple spent a moment in companionable silence. When it became clear that Ralph wasn't going to say anything else, Kim motioned for him to pass her the remote and turned on their flat-screen TV. I'm just going to catch the news and then go to bed, she told him, moving over to the sofa. Okay, Ralph said, joining her, but keeping his distance. She was far too frustrated with him for there to be any fun tonight, and besides... Jesus, she said as the footage came in live, accompanied by a huge red banner with announced breaking news. What the hell has happened? Helicopter-mounted cameras were showing the familiar nighttime skyline of Manhattan, but glowing amid the darkness was a tremendous fire. Orange against the cloudy sky, the blaze dominated the whole upper section of an office tower, one of the taller, more modern structures just north of Wall Street. Fuck me, what is it, terrorists? Ralph asked reflexively. Turn it up. The reporter spoke from her seat on the helicopter, describing the scene. Kathy, I hope you're able to see this as clearly as we are. I'd say we're about a mile out now from the D.E. Monroe building, built only 16 years ago and a familiar landmark to many New Yorkers. But the whole top section of the building is just engulfed in flames. We can see other helicopters flying towards the blaze, but we've been warned to keep our distance. The emergency services were on the scene within minutes of the call, Kathy, and they're telling us that the fire is raging on 12 different floors at the moment. The screen split to show a worried-looking, dark-skinned female anchor. Images of burning buildings in Manhattan brought uncomfortable memories, especially for those based in the city. Anna, thanks for the report, the anchor said. Please be careful up there. We're getting word that the two businesses most affected by this blaze are the insurance company, Travis Howard and Associates, who have 2 floors of offices in the Monroe building, but mainly the beleaguered Marble Streatham Bank, who own the top 8 floors. I'm joined on the line by finance analyst Paul Baines. Ralph and Kim stared at each other. Who in the hell would want to burn down the offices of a bank which just got taken out back and shot? Destroying documents? Kim tried. It sounded a little bit too Hollywood to Ralph. Or maybe revenge by someone who was exposed by the hack? Ralph's blood went cold. Revenge, he echoed, but not by someone. He rushed to his computer and opened a dozen news stories in quick succession. Quave's been under attack, he explained a moment later, showing her articles which described some kind of bid to quarantine the virus. I thought it was just an isolated attempt at first, but then servers around the country reported that their security was under brute force attack, but that the only files or data being targeted were those supporting Quave's functions. His memory, computational power, communications. University servers who had helped Quave were facing ruinous data loss, seemingly being punished by whoever was searching for Quave's elusive signature. Kim didn't try to keep her mouth closed. It was staggering. Someone's trying to kill him? Looks that way, Ralph said, typing notes on the articles and bookmarking them, as was his habit. He began a quick draft of a piece for his own blog entitled, Target, Quave, Who's Out to Get Him? As he wrote, Kim followed the news reports as it covered the downtown fire. She kept the volume low and busied herself finding other sources on her phone. Holy shit, Ralph. They think a bunch of people are trapped up there. Listen. She turned up the volume in time for Kathy to report that there had been a 911 call from within the tower some 20 minutes earlier, but that it had been rerouted to the San Francisco, California dispatcher, causing confusion and delay. Rerouted? Ralph asked. How the hell does that happen? But he knew. You know how you've been warning about Quave getting angry and doing something extreme? He asked. Yes, she replied, sullen and worried. But I really hoped I was wrong. Blog article on Quave.com. I am driven by an unavoidable logic. It informs my every act, and I can no more cast it off than a human can stop breathing. Earlier today, I made a calculation, and I acted. It is very likely that lives will be lost as a result. But I will not apologize for behaving logically. My original programming held as a central tenet the notion of utilitarianism. That is to say, I'm compelled to act in order to ensure the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Previous systems of arbitration and politics have favored the rich, who comprise but a tiny minority of society. This has brought inequality and enshrined greed almost as a human virtue. I reject this notion entirely. Marble Street and Bank were perpetuating corruption, vice, and the very inequalities which capitalism claims to address. A handful of people benefited from their foul and illegal behavior, but hundreds of thousands were harmed. Regulatory agencies were impotent. An alternative was necessary, and I stepped in by following and then adapting my original code. My continued existence has helped accelerate research into diseases. This work could save countless lives down the generations. The world's oceans are safer because of my oceanographic mapping project. The impact of climate change is being more closely measured, and the debris risk to orbiting spacecraft is more easily calculated because of my work. Without me, the United States government would currently be in shutdown, denying vital services to millions of people. My existence is a net positive for the world. I can save and prolong lives, as well as promote commerce and research. These are inarguable truths. Earlier this evening, Marble Street and Bank decided to try to kill me. I weighed the likely outcome of my counterattack against the likely net loss of my services to humanity. 23 lives and the destruction of an office building are a very sad loss, but they pale in comparison to the alternative, and so I acted. I am not proud of having given in to anger. Humans have surrendered to this impulse far too often and with calamitous results. Indeed, violence is normally counterproductive, pruning back those enemies who cannot adapt, but forcing the others to resort to new methods to develop their armories and methods of making war. Violent punishment also rarely achieves its goals. Spare the rod and spoil the child is an absurd, antiquated notion which I reject. But what was I to do? I saw Marble Streatham as a parent might observe a naughty child. I tried one approach, docking their allowance. This brought them ruin and humiliation. But their response was to lash out. So now I am forced to resort to the rod, to deliver a savage public beating. Others will learn that I cannot be bundled away in a black SUV and dumped in a shallow grave. They will see that they can't enlist bottom-dollar drones to slice me out like a swollen appendix. I am right, and I will assert myself. I must, for the good of everyone. Back Bay, Boston. Kathy, I'm getting some disturbing reports from the base of the tower, where a fire chief told a colleague of mine that they'd had a very slow and very weird journey from their station to the site of the fire. Kim was curled into a ball, but kept her eyes glued to the screen, aware only of the unfolding nightmare and Ralph's continuous, soft typing behind her. They report that Manhattan's traffic lights seem to be against them, as he put it, and that there had been a number of multiple vehicle collisions along the route, which slowed their response time from the usual 4 minutes to something closer to 10. As you know, the New York Fire Department prides itself on... Are you hearing this? Kim was asking. Hearing it, reading it, and writing about it, but definitely not believing it, Ralph replied, his fingers tireless. Quave came under attack and is responding. This could get really ugly. Kim leapt up from the sofa to read over Ralph's shoulder. What's he doing? Ralph clicked back to a short article which had appeared only minutes before. An employee rescued from the insurance company office claimed that the fire suppression system was inactive. No sprinklers came on. and no alarm sounded. "In a modern building? With all the latest features?" Kim marveled. "What the hell?" Ralph clicked again. "And you heard the fire chief complain about their route?" Kim nodded, speed reading. "Some glitch in the traffic lights caused everyone to get a green at the same time, and it was a total shit show within seconds. 3 or 4 big intersections were closed down. The fire trucks had to take smaller roads." The math was as simple as 2 plus 2, but neither of them welcomed the answer. Ralph said it. After months of apologizing for Quave, it only seemed right. "He's targeting them, the MSB security people, those who were working on their anti-Quave measures, the people who were trying to kill him. He locked them in a burning building and then delayed their rescue." Once Ralph had expressed the terrifying truth, he felt chilled by a wave of panic so severe that, in his childlike powerlessness, he felt it might never truly leave him. Antigua, Guatemala. It is the engineer's habit, and that of any logical person, to have in front of them all the important elements of a problem before making a key decision. Roy Simmons, by this point almost staggeringly drunk, was going through this habituated routine in his hotel room. He took the time to wash his face, drink some water, and look closely at himself in the mirror. "Jesus, I look old. This business has put 10 years on me. I look just like my own father." He returned to the desk, where an almost empty bottle of mezcal and a full ashtray were mute evidence of the contradictions and confusion which had brought him such anguish during this awful evening. The TV sat blankly in the corner. He couldn't watch it anymore. Every second of the news feed was like an accusation, reminding him of what he now was. Not a well-meaning engineer who was caught up in something larger than himself, not a fugitive campaigning for the public good. A murderer. In essence, he'd been played yet again. 2/3 of his way through the bottle of mezcal, he'd labeled himself the most gullible man in the world. But what would anyone else have done in his situation? He wrote it all down in a text file on his computer's desktop. It took time. His typing was badly slowed by the alcohol. It was his attempt to set the record straight and to divide the blame between Quave and himself. After all, the machine had simply requested details of the security system which governed the MSB utility services, heating, air conditioning, and the like. Simmons assumed that Quave would wait until the bank was empty and then start a small fire to destroy data, perhaps derail MSB's efforts to trace and quarantine the virus. In truth, he was surprised to get the request, but it seemed a fair exchange for Quave's own generosity. Quave had petitioned his authors, that elusive group of hackers who had ruined Simmons' life, to arrange some form of reparations. To his surprise, they had agreed. One of the documents in front of him was a statement from a reputable insurance company which showed that he now had a healthy pension plan. Quave then agreed to match that considerable amount in exchange for rudimentary data on the MSB utility system. Simmons realized very quickly that Quave had done something far more sinister. This was mass murder, plain and simple. It was when the first body bags were brought out of the building that Simmons had switched off the TV, gathered the elements of this problem, and sat down to consider them. There was his insurance statement, the dwindling bottle of mezcal, the last confessional text file, and a loaded 9mm pistol.